You likely know that this is a draw. This is a rook pawn ending. So the rook pawn is along the rook's file. This black pawn is trying to promote, create a queen right here on the h1 square. White can't allow that. Queen versus queen. That's going to be a draw. He's going to jump over here, try to force the king to move away from the pawn. He moves right over here. You would think, okay, I'm going to bring my king closer and deliver checkmate. But right now, black is set up in a stalemate position. So no matter what happens, white can keep giving some checks, and the black king's always going to be threatening to promote his own pawn no matter what. White's not going to be able to make any progress. But you may not know this next part. This looks like a quite similar position, able to make a queen. It's quite simply going to be a draw as long as no one blunders their queen, which, depending on who you are, that's not necessarily true. But white here, his king he's just aggressive enough to be able to make it. So white here actually jumps his king forward and gets even more aggressive and allows black to get a queen. And right here, white is going to get closer and closer to this king and queen, and the king can't get behind the queen. The queen's stuck in the corner. So he gives a check. Black tries to get out. White goes here. Black has to move all the way back here to g2. It's the only move to stay in contact with his own queen and not throw away the game. White jumps even further forward. And now black here, again, he's got a couple different options. If he did move right here, there'd be this check, this would be forced, and that would be checkmate. So he has to move back to g1. It's his only move. And now the star move, the big surprise for white. Not sure if you see this. You might want to pause it if you don't already know this concept. White just moves his king forward. And the idea behind this move is black doesn't have anywhere to go. His king, all of these squares are taken. The only checks that are available, those are all checks, but it would give up his queen for free. And then any non-check move gives up checkmate in one for white. And that's just it. This is one possible example of where this can show up in the version of a pawn race, where you get a queen, your opponent gets a queen, but you have the upper hand. White's only real idea is, I'm 2 moves away from a queen, let me go make a queen. I can't even grab this pawn, black's defending it. So that's what happens. We both get queens, and we could see this aggressive king over here. We're going to set up that same pattern. Naturally, what we're going to want to do, we're going to be aggressive as possible. We're jumping all the way forward here. If black moves over to h2, this is checkmate. So he's going to have to move back to g1. That's what he does. And now white here, again, you have to make those series of checks. You got to get your queen in the ideal position. You have to make sure black doesn't have any moves with his king. This configuration right here, where the kings are opposing and the black queen is right next to that king with nowhere to go. Remember that for later. There's a more complicated version of this in just a little bit. So that's rook pawns. Let's take a look at knight pawns. We have a little bit of a different situation right here. This is another pawn race, but we're against a knight pawn, which is a little bit different than a rook pawn. We have a little bit more flexibility, and I'll show you that right now. If you just go over here and black decides to go make a queen, we're going to race, and we're both going to make a queen at the same time. That's going to be a draw. It's not going to be quite enough. So white needs to think of a little bit of a different plan. Well, the first move, naturally, this isn't really going to help too much. You got to get your king out of the way at some point, so you might as well just do it right now. And black here, we said it's a race. He's got to get in here. We know that black is going to lose that race, so white has got to get a little bit closer. You might think, well, black here can just keep running, but if you've seen my other video on the square of the pawn on those king and pawn endgames, it's not going to be quite enough because white's able to get into the square of this pawn. It forms a square right like this. And so white's going to be able to capture that pawn by the time it gets all the way to the goal line. So we're not just going to be able to run as black. Black has to do something. He's not able to get to this pawn over here. Not like that. Definitely not. And so what does he do? He decides to run over. He's going to try to defend and escort his own pawn. White shoots over right here. Again, if we just race right now, we're going to queen right at the same time. It's not going to be quite good enough. Black continues to move over. He has to do so. There's nothing else for him. And again, white shoots over right here because if we go here, we're going to be able to get that pawn just in time. So black right here is thinking, well, if white decides to start running with his pawn right now, I'll be able to run with my pawn, and white's not going to be in time anymore. Moves over, and now, boom, I have escorted my pawn all the way to the goal line. And so white needs to be able to do something. So what does white do? White goes after that pawn, and black again is thinking, okay, I'm going to go up here. If white moves forward, have escorted my pawn over this way. And then if white decides to take my pawn, I've made it into the square of his pawn. This square right here, I'm in there just in time. I'm going to be able to make it. That pawn is going to be stopped. But instead of that, white has set up a position where he has forced black to move forward. He has forced him along this diagonal right here. And why is that important? Because as we progress all the way forward, we will both queen at the same time, kind of, except white queens with check. He's forced black along this black diagonal, and now black is out of moves. And you're thinking, okay, cool, well, I'm just going to go and escort my pawn right over here. We got to have a similar situation like we had with the rook pawn. You know, the king's not super, super close. However, this is a knight pawn, and a knight pawn, not very easy to defend. Because what does white do? White just gets his queen way closer, makes a bunch of checks, and right here he's saying, okay, cool, I'm going to grab your pawn right here. If you queen, I'm going to grab your queen right there. So, okay, black, cool, I'm going to go promote. And now white here jumps over, check, and you either run away, I grab your pawn, I win the game, or you run over here, you block your own pawn. You still have moves. You still have moves to do. It's not like when you're the rook in the corner and this would be a stalemate position. White just gets one step closer. Black again moves over, and we get the black king. We force him back right behind his own pawn again, and nothing to do. White moves forward, and we end up getting checkmate in just a couple more moves. We've got one more knight pawn race example. Knight pawn again. We're along the knight file. That's a knight pawn. We might queen at the same time, but when you go forward and you do that, there is a trick right here, right along this file. You got to be careful of it. You're going to lose your queen. Black knows a little bit better than that. He knows when white makes his step forward, let me stop his pawn. And white's thinking, okay, well, you know what? Let me escort my pawn. And black's like, cool. Yeah, don't have that same situation. We're going to be fine. Just like setting up a back rank checkmate where you have the king blocking the king from moving forward. Your own king is blocking off those files. I think you see where this is going. Check, check, and there. We're moving the pawns inward. Bishop pawn's confusing. You might be thinking, especially if you're at a higher level, okay, bishop pawn, I'm going to be able to draw this. I know the trick with the queen. I'm going to show you that trick, but I'm also going to show you why it's not that simple and how you could win this game anyway. And so in this position right here, white, again, is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 moves away from queening. Black, yeah, same thing. It's 5. Just trust me. If we imagine a queen right here and a queen right here, then, it's just not going to quite work. Well, you're thinking, oh, this is a check, though. So let me go ahead and grab my queen. Well, remember, square the pawn. Black's able to make it into that square, and it's just not going to be enough. Well, naturally, you're going to want to bring your king into the game, and when you bring your king into the game, do it as actively as possible, which is opposing your opponent's king. Now the king can't run this way and go straight for the corner. And so black here might think, okay, I'm going to go grab my own queen right here. It's just not going to be quite good enough because white's going to be able to get here. If you ever move forward here, this is going to stop and win that pawn and win the game. Instead of that, well, black, he's got to jump over. If we naturally continue this path, we move our king over. If he keeps moving, we're going to keep moving our king. And right now, I mean, obviously you could play this, I suppose. But the king's blocking here, and the pawn is blocking this, forcing the king back. And then if the king goes back, we're going to move 2 moves. We're going to make a queen. That's going to be a really, really easy win for us. So black needs to get a little bit more complicated than just continuing this path. He might think, okay, cool. Well, I'm going to do my own little trick. I'm going to play c6. That forces white to move backwards. And if that forces white to move backwards, I'm going to bring my own king forward. and then I'm going to be able to eventually get over here, win this pawn. It's going to be great. We're going to start running our own pawn up the board. I guess that's fine, but I mean, what is the point? We've got black here, moves over, and white again just keeps plowing it. But we've created an escort. We've created an escort. We're going to be able to make a queen ourselves, or are we? After we move forward, we have this position where we have a bishop pawn 1 square away from promotion. And it's really, really easy to go astray right here. For instance, one simple misstep, if you get your queen, okay, cool, I want to be as active as possible. This is actually already white throwing away the game with this one simple move. And really what black's trying to do here, he's trying to get all the way over to the other side of his pawn. He's working his way. He wants to get over to the corner. Why does he want to get over the corner? We'll see in a second. He jumps down, and white here's thinking, okay, let me just let me get closer. Let me grab this pawn. Black here, and we're like, okay, cool. Well, now, cool, I'm going to be able to bring my king just a little bit closer. That's the whole point. That's just what you did with the knight pawn. What's the big deal? Now, black here, again, threatening to make a queen. Okay, cool. Everything's under control. We move over, and black here, the miracle move. Some of you may already know this. He jumps over to A1, gives up his pawn because this is going to be a draw. So going all the way back to when we queened, we cannot allow black to move his way all the way over to A1 unless it's on our terms. So we got to be a little bit careful. In this position right here, white, going to make a check. It's going to stop right here on D5. You do want to be really active, but you just want to be really careful about how you do it. Here, if black were to move over to C3, it's not going to be good enough because white's going to have a simple check right here. Black's really only move is this move right here. Literally his only move is right there, in which case, we'd be able to defend the queen square. I know you're going to be able to win that game. So black, instead of that's going to be a little bit more resilient. He's moving over this way. White here, again, pins this pawn over here. Black wants to make a queen, and hopefully you can call back to our previous example and recognize a pattern here. White here has a super, super cool win, and I'm just going to give you a hint here in just a second. It involves this and this and this. So let's see it. White moves forward, allows a queen, and white here jumps forward, creates that opposition, and the queen right next to the king, kind of similar to what it was in the corner in the rook example, except you got to be careful because a lot of times you could go, the queen can move over, give white a check, but in this case, the white queen is actually covering that square. Remember this pattern. King, king, queen, but be careful of that check over on the side. That's how you win these bishop endgames. Keep that king out of the corner and set up this super, super tricky checkmate, allowing your opponent to queen. Total insanity. So we reviewed the rook and bishop pawns and how they're kind of complicated. I mean, that covers all these ones. We looked at the knight ones. Those were pretty straightforward. You just work your way over to the center, and unfortunately, king and queen pawns are all kind of the same as the knight pawns. You do a million checks, you force that king in front of his own pawn, and then you get your king one step closer. What we're looking at right here is a 25 move checkmate sequence with a million checks in between. Just be patient. You'll be able to make it happen with the king and queen pawns. Queen versus pawn, you wouldn't think it's that complicated, but holy cow, there's a lot to unpack. I'm going to continue through endgame studies, working my way through this book, through Silman's book, through some other endgame resources and sharing it with you. Subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you around here soon. Going back to this position right here, even if the white king was all the way up here on F8, the same thing would happen. You'd do a million checks, you'd get yourself closer over here, you'd force the black king in front of his own pawn, then you'd take one step. Then you'd move over a bunch and do all this stuff, get the black king back in front of his own pawn, take one more step. It takes a lot longer, but just be methodical about it. You'll be able to get that win.